One day I came home and I noticed that the temperature was a little bit warmer than it usually is. And so I went into the Sense app and checked to see when the last time the air conditioner, specifically the last time the compressor ran. And I noticed it hadn't ran since 1 o'clock that morning. I had to go figure out what was wrong because in the heat of August, you need air conditioning.
Alright, so there's a contactor and there's a capacitor. So let's see what happens. So fan is running, but I don't hear the compressor running too. Alright, so I did find the problem. One of the wires, where is it? There you go. One of the wires right here burned on the contact, as you see. So, looks like I need to get another contact, maybe, and restrip that wire and replace it. And looks like that wire behind it also started to burn as well. I got the replacement part for my HVAC, but can you believe you actually have to have a HVAC license in order to buy this part? So luckily I was able to get it without that, but yeah, insane, right?
So the next step is to check to make sure that there is no electricity flowing to the condenser. The last thing you want to do is to open this and then get electrocuted. So then you proceed to open the condenser. This particular model has 4 screws that cover the housing. Your model may be slightly different, so just pay attention to that. Next, you're going to disconnect all of the wires that run to the contactor, because after you get all the wires disconnected, then you'll have to remove the contactor. For my particular situation, the contactor had screws on the connecting points. Some of them did have these, what they call quick connectors, but other ones had screws on them. So regardless of how the wires are connected to the contactor, you'll need to disconnect all of the wires from the contactor in order to remove it.
Alright folks, so I got my new contactor, which is this one over here, and my old contactor, which is this one here. For the most part, they are pretty much the same. The screw on this one, actually, I had to screw it all the way out to get the lead out of there. So, but there are some significant differences that I'm noticing. So on the top of this one, actually you stick the wire in, whereas this one had a clamp that you put a connector on it, and then you put that connector around the screw head. So the top is essentially like the bottom now, where you stick the whole wire in and then you screw to clamp it down all the way. Also the same number of pins here. Looks to be there's 8 on the bottom and there's 8 on the top here. I only had, I believe it was 2 wires here.
Next step is to remove the contactor itself.
I won't be using all of those pins since I don't have all of those wires. And this one also is enclosed, so as you can see the coil on this one from both sides. So, but you can on this one, and the reason being is somebody actually took account that, hey, bugs can actually get into this thing and cause problems. So what they do now is they actually seal it up entirely, so all this mechanical stuff like this right here is not exposed to the elements. However, you can take these 2 screws off and this plate will come up, and then it will look just like this inside underneath this cover here. So that's the difference between the new contactor and the old contactor. One other difference, they did not have, if you can kind of tell, this one is rated at 25 amps and this one is rated at 30, so they didn't have the same rating. but it is essentially the same part, just the rating is slightly different. So as you see, it's still operating with a 24-volt coil, like this one is here. And so it's also a different brand, but I don't think that really makes much of a difference.
And be sure to keep up with all the screws, because this thing does have to go back in, and trying to find the screws that match or will fit the holes that is in this particular panel or condenser is pretty difficult. I mean, you could use one of the other screws and put it there, but again, the hassle of going to the store and trying to find another screw to replace that one can be difficult. And so once you get the old one out, you can put the new one in. And pretty much putting the new one in is the reverse steps of taking the old one out. In my particular scenario, I had wires that burned. I'm not sure if there was just an arc or just corrosion, or maybe even a critter or something got into here and shorted things out. But nonetheless, the wires were burned, as I showed you earlier in the video. So what you have to do is pull out more wire, cut off the burnt section. Ideally, there's a reasonable amount of wire left in here. If not, you may have to, what they call kind of like pigtail. So you put in a new wire of a longer length and join the two wires together, and then you'll be able to, resize it back to the appropriate length. But in my case, I had plenty of wire, as you can see here, so that adding additional wire was not necessary. I was just able to cut off what I had and wire it in. The contactor that I'm using does not have the quick connectors on it or require that they be used. And so what I was able to do was to stick the to stick the wire into the hole and then tighten the screw down, and that held the wire in place to the connector, so you don't have that quick connector on there anymore. Once you have everything connected, you'll need to rearrange the wires and secure them back inside of the enclosure or the panel. Ideally, you want to make sure that none of the wires are touching each other. If you have to, use zip ties. Originally, before I pulled this panel up, all the wires were connected together in a large bundle with a zip tie. So try to put it back the way it was before you start messing with it. That way you can ensure that you don't have any issues in the future. And as you can see here, I have the entire wire set wrapped in wrapped in zip with a single zip tie like it was before, and I'm making sure that everything fits the way it was before I started messing with things, and that none of the wires are crossed over, all those type of things, to make sure you don't short out the system or cause yourself future problems that you or a technician may have to fix. Once you have all the wires in place and you think everything is ready to go, then go flip on the system and make sure everything works as it should.
All right, so I have air conditioning again. Woohoo!
And you want to do this before you put the cover back on, because if you test it after you put the cover back on and something's not right, then you have to take the cover back off, which is a little bit difficult. Now, I know on some systems, in order to access the contactor and the capacitor, you actually have to take the fan off and some other components. So in that case, if your system is set up that way, you'll need to put those items back on before testing, because if the fan is not secured and you switch it on, the fan may dislodge itself from the unit and also be a hazard to anybody that would be standing nearby if it were to come apart from the system. Once you have confirmed that everything is working as it should be, then you can put the panel and screws back in place, and that will be it. Also, while you're at it, you can check the other parts of the condensing coil, such as the lines that run in and out, as well as the wiring that goes in and out to that unit. This would be a great time to do that, since you are already having to do repairs on that, to look it over as well. And I didn't mention it earlier in the video, but if you have bugs or anything inside of the place where the contactor and capacitor are, try to clean those out. The reason being is because oftentimes those are the culprits for your capacitor or contactor to stop working. They sometimes will crawl in there, and when it comes to the capacitor, they actually crawl inside of the capacitor, and when the capacitor goes to switch on, it won't be able to switch on because that bug might be blocking the mechanical portions of that from moving. And similar for the capacitor, if there's a bug or some kind of animal in there and it's touching the two more points of the capacitor, and that capacitor switches on, it can actually cause that capacitor to short out because that bug or animal is actually giving a path between two or more of the terminals on the capacitor. So again, clean out the bugs, cobwebs, anything else of that nature. Also take note if there are any chewed wires, because if there's chewed wires, then you probably have a rat or rodent problem, and that needs to be addressed as well.
Hopefully you've learned a little bit and are able to apply this in the future. If you have any questions about a contactor or a relay, please hit me up and drop a comment in the comment section below. Also, please check out me on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at almostengr, and check out my website, thealmostengineer.com.